Thank you guys so much for coming to our webinar, Predictable Chart Writing with Clicker. Good afternoon. My name is Tony Caggiano. I'm a senior consultant here at CRIC, and we are joined by the wonderful Beth Poss, an independent consultant with years of experience in the classroom working with kiddos, as well as working with Clicker. We're going to spend the next hour or so with Beth talking about predictable chart writing in Clicker. Beth, thank you so very much for this collaboration. It's been awesome to work with you. Can you talk us through the agenda as well as the session goals with the group, please?
Definitely. So today we are, as you mentioned, we are going to take a look at how we can do predictable chart writing and do it with Clicker, but we're really going to talk about the idea of just exactly what predictable chart writing is and how we can make it accessible for all learners. We are going to talk a little bit about how important it is that you don't stop with just predictable chart writing, that you transfer that to independent writing, and then we'll have an opportunity for some reflections on everything that we've gone over today.
And then we also have our learning objectives here. Beth, can you confirm that you could see my screen at this point?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So these are our session goals. We're going to look at why predictable chart writing is great for our emergent writers, the 5 stages of predictable chart writing, and then how to make this accessible here. So, Beth, do you think it would be a good idea to start with what predictable chart writing is and who it benefits?
Yep, definitely. So there are 5 major components to predictable chart writing. The first is to write the chart. The second one is to well, let me back up just a second and let me talk just a little bit about some features about predictable chart writing and why it's so important, actually. So we're going to have, I'm going to reverse and we're going to go back to, I'm going to say what the different components of predictable chart writing are, and then I'm going to review, just trying to work that out in my head a second. So there's 5 stages of predictable chart writing. We write the chart. Then we reread the chart. And this gives us an opportunity to work on a lot of different skills within rereading the chart. And we're going to talk about each of these in much more detail. The third step is to work with sentence strips, where you're actually going to take apart that sentence and then put it back together. The fourth step is to be the sentence, and I like to talk about that as a way of really making learning life-sized. And then finally, we publish the book. Now, just a little bit about what exactly predictable chart writing is and who it is going to benefit. So predictable chart writing is a collaborative learning activity. And very specifically, it's a shared writing experience that you do generally with a class, and it's group focused. It's a way of validating all learners' thoughts and contributions, and the ideas for what you are writing all come from the learners. And it's typically recorded by the educator so that everybody can see the writing happening and the writing process happening in real time. Predictable chart writing, I feel really strongly that it's something that it's often emphasized as something very specific to emergent writing, but I think there's actually a lot of application with some of the concepts around predictable chart writing with lots of different learners. And so as we move through this session, we're going to even talk about how this is a strategy that you can use even with some more advanced writers and readers. Now, even though we are mostly back in person, I think there's still folks that are doing some hybrid teaching out there. There are maybe days and weeks where classes are going into quarantine and we're back to virtual teaching. But even though we are mostly back to in-person learning, when we can use a digital tool with our predictable chart writing, it can in general make it just so much more accessible to so many of our learners.
Absolutely. Great. Okay. So Beth, we know what this, well, we have an idea of what this is going to look like in practice with our 5 stages. In our prep for this, we talked about why a mentor text would be important to the process of predictable chart writing. Can you expand on that a little?
Yeah. So in that first stage of predictable chart writing, I like to start off by reading a book that will essentially be a mentor text for the writing that we're doing. It's when you choose a mentor text, or when you start off a writing activity with by reading a text, it helps set the stage for your learners to understand that we write for a purpose, right? We write to have our writing read by somebody else. We're not just writing to put it out there in thin air. And honestly, we're not just writing to have it like read by our teachers and read by our parents. We're writing for a real audience, which is what we get to when in that step 5 and publish a book. So I really like to start that off with our readers, with our students, with a mentor text. And so like I actually pulled up a couple of different things like on my iPad that, you know, people might like. There's a great I Spy book. So we're gonna theme this whole session today around fall and autumn and things, right? Because we're right in that season. And so there's a great book out there called I Spy with My Little Eye Autumn that I downloaded for $3.59 on Amazon. You might find one of my favorite resources is Unite for Literacy website, and that's uniteforliteracy.com. And they have a great book on there called Here Comes Autumn. And so that might be a book that you read in advance with your learners, just to sort of set the stage, give them some background information about the topic. So if we're going to be writing about fall, about autumn, we need to make sure that they have some of that vocabulary and background information. And so by reading a book, it can be the way that we make sure that we are front loading that information for our learners. And so that's generally the very first thing that I do as a precursor, even to our chart writing. And I'm going to take something that we've learned about from this book, that this book has prepped us for, and that's going to be our topic. And then the next thing that I'm going to do, and if we want to go ahead and open up that first, do we want to move to that write the chart slide, or we can move to the
so we'll go in and grab our clicker board.
Yeah, let's go in and grab our clicker board.
Okay,
because what I want to talk about is something that we can do as a pre-writing strategy.
Absolutely, guys. So we're going to go in and look for a brainstorming board. For you guys who are newer to Clicker, you might not be familiar with Learning Grids. Through Learning Grids, we have over 2,600 resources available for download. I'm going to be focusing on our clicker boards, which are brainstorming opportunities here, mind maps. And I'm going to look up the topic of fall. In general, we have over 50 resources for fall. Again, I'm going to be looking for my boards here. And we have this beautiful clicker board, our fall words that we can get started with here.
Right. And so after reading our book, our fall themed book, it's a perfect opportunity to turn to our learners and say to them, hey, tell me some things that you either just learned or that you already knew about fall. And this is completely an opportunity for them, for them to be working on their communication skills, to apply that background knowledge that they maybe already had or that they've just gained from the book that we've been reading, and be able to just write. And in brainstorming, the rules of brainstorming is that there are no wrong answers. And so hopefully as we are saying, hey, what do you know about fall? And we do have a picture there, and that might help as a visual cue. And maybe our learners are going to say, leaves, right? And we're going to type that in and just say leaves. And so the teacher's going to type that in. Now a teacher might be, as they're doing that, they might be thinking leaves, right? And somebody else might say pumpkins. Somebody else might say orange, right? We're looking for any responses from our communicators. Somebody might say, they might take that background knowledge that they know that Halloween is coming up and talk about candy and Halloween and costumes. We might get somebody that says scarecrow. We've got happen to have a crow in that picture. We might have somebody that says something about scarecrow. We might have somebody that says something about trees, right? Because we've got some trees in that picture and we're talking about the fall leaves. I might have somebody that says something about snow. Now, that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with fall, but the response that we're going to give as they're brainstorming is, you know what, you're right. Every once in a while, it snows during fall. Sometimes it snows in November. Where I live in Maryland, we've had snow in November. So you're right. Sometimes in fall, there's snow, right? Somebody might have said swimming pool. And I'm going to say, oh, you're right. You know, we don't get to swim as much in the fall as we do in the summer, right? So we're going to validate everybody's response, whether it technically, meets that criteria of something to do with fall. We're going to make sure that that response is validated and that they are able to feel like that their response is meaningful and they've made a meaningful part of that discussion. So all of our contributions are right there. All right. So once we have this, there's a really cool thing that I really, really love about the clicker boards. So Tony, maybe you can demonstrate that, because the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to write the chart, right? And so what we're going to do, what we're able to do with this is let's go ahead and have it sent as a diagram into our clicker document, right? So now we're in a writing document, but we were able to take that brainstorming web, whatever you want to call it, right? And bring it in. So it can be a cue for our learners as we now start to do our chart writing right? So that they've got some of that information there and we can remind them and prompt them. So typically when we're doing a predictable chart writing, the predictable part of the predictable chart writing is a sentence starter. We're going to have some sort of a stem there. And we are going to have, so it's going to start off. Now, typically it's 3 to 4 words, right? It might be, depending on the individuals that you're working with, it might be, I see, or it might be, we might want to get a little bit more complex with some of our learners and have it say something like, in the fall, I see. And so we'd be writing that out. Now, as the educator is writing that, they might be doing some things like see. Oh, I know this word. It is from our, we've been working on that word. And the word see is S-E-E. That might be a word that we've been practicing. So in the fall, I see. And the educator usually gives the first example. So if I'm the educator in here, I might say, in the fall, I see colorful leaves. And so I would type that out. And then I would give my attribution. And so that would be, Mrs. Poss or Mrs. P or Beth or whatever you guys refer to yourselves as educators. Because as we go through this process, every writer's contributions are going to be validated. In our brainstorming, we may or may not do that, because in brainstorming, our learners, more than one, they might provide more than one option at a time. We're not necessarily looking for that attribution there, but in the actual writing, we want to know who is doing that. All right, so then we would continue to solicit examples from our students, right? So if Tony here is my students, we would go ahead and say in the fall, and then what Tony gets to contribute is, now Tony's got a little bit more sophisticated language, okay? And so she said, I see friends playing outside. But Sam might just say in the fall, and we would write that out already, in the fall, I see. And he might just give, in the fall, I see, he might just say costumes, right? Because many of our learners may just be at that sort of single word level. We're modeling that sentence stem for them. We're going to love it if they say, I see costumes, or if they put some words together. So maybe then, Patricia's going to come along and she's going to see, in the fall, I see trees, right? And so we'd be typing this out. We'd be writing this out. We're, for the sake of time right now, Tony's doing a little bit of copying and pasting, but we'd actually be typing it so that our students can see that writing process happening. And they'd have lots of repetition of that sentence stem in the fall I see, with lots of opportunities for modeling it, right? And as we're doing this, we're going to be modeling it with their communication systems. I know Tony's got Clicker Communicator up, and I happen to have LAMP up, right? So, you know, on my device, I might be using my LAMP Words for Life, and I would be able to go in and do I, and I'm so bad at being able to look like this and being able to do it. There we go. So I'm looking for my look on here. But I go in and I'm like, as I'm looking for look, I'm not finding my look.
That's fine.
It's okay. Tony's showing it with hers. So you'd be able to go in there and have that. So we want these opportunities where they're using whatever communication devices that they have. These are opportunities for them to be practicing navigating to that vocabulary. Tony's got a set there with hers that's very specific. So she's got her core words at the beginning and then real specific to a fall fringe set there. So those opportunities are, so we'd continue building that. Now, once everybody's had a chance to write their sentence and contribute to that, we would read that together as a group, and then we'd be done with that step of it, right? So together we would say, this has been a fantastic thing. In the fall, I see colorful leaves. That was Mrs. P. In the fall, I see friends playing. Now, with Clicker, we have the option for students to be able to actually have some text to speech as well, but let's model that in the next piece of it. So let's say this is the first part. Now, we've got 5 steps. There is not the expectation that you are going to do all 5 stages of predictable chart writing in one day. That would take up your English language arts block and maybe then some. You might also it might be too much going on that same thing at one time, right? Our students need their learning in different chunks of things, and it may be time to now move on to math activity or a motor activity or whatever it is that they need. But the next day, it's 5 steps. There's 5 days, school days in a week. The next day, we're going to come back and we are now going to have our second stage. And that is going to be the opportunity to reread that chart. Now, we're going to start off by rereading the chart as a group, doing some choral reading, right? Which might include our learners with their communication devices. It would be us as the adult, the educators, modeling it with our communication device, and also pointing to the text as we're reading it. So, you know, ideally, if you're in a classroom, you're going to have this up on your interactive whiteboard, and you'd be able to be up there and reading it as well. As we are rereading the text, we are also going to take opportunities for learners to read their contributions individually, right? So Tony would get to come up and she would get to read however she is able to her sentence. It might be pointing to that sentence. It might be using her augmentative communication device to read that sentence, or it might be using the text-to-speech features of Clicker, in this case, to reread that sentence.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who are familiar with Clicker, you know that speech support is the backbone to what we do. I have turned our default off, which is to speak each sentence for the purpose of this webinar. But through the speak text icon, you have the option to play that speech back. So I've highlighted.
In the fall, I see friends playing outside.
And I can read that contribution in a way that's meaningful to me.
And so this really gives all of our learners the opportunity, both readers and writers, right? And notice how I do want to point out one thing that's really important with this. There is features in Clicker where you could have pictures to go along with that text. We very purposefully are not using any pictures with this because our emphasis right now is on the text, right? It's not on writing with pictures. It's on the text. We'll talk about when we get a little further along and we're publishing our book, we're going to look for some illustrations then, right, to go along with it. But we're not adding picture support to this text right now. It's a predictable sentence stem. The words that our learners are coming up with are words that they're able to generate using their voice output devices or their own speech, right? So we're working on that vocabulary and having that. Now, this rereading the chart is also an opportunity. It may be that, let's say the word see is a spelling word that you guys have been working on, or that's a word that you've been identifying in other texts. This is a perfect opportunity as you're going through to let's find all of the words see that are in this. In the fall, I see. We might be looking for the word letter. Now, you wouldn't do all of these in the same thing. You'd maybe pick one, right? Because we're talking, this is like a 10, 15 minute chunk of time, and it's not an hour long lesson. You might be, oh, wow, I see a lot of the letter S in there. So let's find all the letter S that we can, right? So it's an opportunity to work on reinforcing that sentence stem, reinforcing particular text features. It might be that we're talking about, every sentence ends in a period, right? And again, we're still continuing to highlight the contributors to that. So we're making connections to what each of our writers got to contribute with that.
Absolutely. I love that. All right. So we've been through our first 2 stages here, Beth. What comes next? What's the third step?
So the next step is working with sentence strips. Now, if I had this, and I'm going to tell you, there is a non-tech piece to this that I would absolutely do, right? We're talking, this is kind of very tech oriented. Lots of times when you're doing predictable chart writing, you are simply handwriting this out with a marker on a chart. That's where like the chart writing comes in for it, right? The chart is the chart paper that you're using. But we're showing how you can do this with some technology tools. But I would still print out on like as large a piece of paper as I could each of those sentences. So for my next thing, working with sentence strips, I would have printed out each sentence, given each sentence to the writer of those sentences, and have worked with that learner to cut up, literally cut up the sentence into each discrete word. This is helping our learners understand that sentences are made up of words. Now, not all of our learners have great fine motor skills. And you know what? If they cut through a word, you know what we can do when they cut through a word with paper? We can tape it back together. Okay? It's not that hard.
Right.
But, and then we would reorder those sentences, the paper sentences, and put them back in order. But that definitely presents a challenge for some of our kids to be as independent as possible, especially those that might have some real impact with their motor skills. And this is one of the, when I first started to think about how could I look at predictable chart writing and use a tool like Clicker to make it, to really make it work, it was with this idea of going into a Clicker sentence set. Am I saying the right?
Yep, okay, you got it.
So we're going to take a look we're going to go a little under the hood with Clicker, and Tony's going to show us how we can allow learners to be way more independent, learners of all different skills, be way more independent in reconstructing a sentence.
Absolutely. So what we have in Clicker are our Clicker sets. And I'm just going to go to our new Clicker set menu here to give you guys a quick overview. We have our sentence sets, which provide simple sentence building opportunities for students. And that's what we're going to use here today. The Connect set builds upon that. And then we also have our word banks for our writers who are a bit more independent and looking for more vocabulary support. So I'm going to click into my sentence set here, and I've already copied the text that we produced together. And that is exactly how this piece of predictable chart writing would work. You are utilizing the sentences that the kiddos contributed. And from here, I am able to click OK. And what you guys will see is that each of these sentences has gone onto its individual grid. Each of those words have their own cell. And this allows for students to build their sentences. So when I click go, I'm just going to come to a new line here. I can build this on my own in a randomized way. So in the fall.
Can you show them how they can have a preview of that sentence? Can we go back
Absolutely.
into it? Because sometimes
absolutely.
we need to see the whole sentence put together.
Right. So for students who don't need the model, they could come in and build this. But what Clicker also offers are different models and different word orders that will support different types of learners. So we have a view and copy model. Like Beth said, this is going to give us a preview of the sentence. We have a view and remember model, which is more of a pop-up. And then we also
that's my favorite one is the view and remember.
We also have our listen model. And then we could come in and play around with the word order as well. Maybe we have a kiddo who is going to need a significant amount of support to build this sentence. We could put this in guided or forced order. We could put this in sentence order, or like I said, alphabetical or random. And then to show you what this looks like, we click go. This is our on-grid or view and copy model. So I could look at this, I could play it.
In the fall, I see colorful leaves.
And then from here, as you could see, I cannot get this sentence wrong. Once I punctuate, it will read for me. Following, we also have our pop-up. I think this is, you said the auditory was your favorite, right?
No,
Beth?
This one is my favorite. I like the pop-up and I like the random order because I like the idea that kids make mistakes and it's okay. And they can look at it and compare it and say, gosh, does mine look and sound like the original sentence that I wrote, or is it different? So I like that. Now, I do think there are times that we have learners who have low tolerance for frustration and they really benefit from that forced order. But my favorite is where they can see a preview, it goes away. They can listen to the preview and it goes away. And then they try to put it into that order themselves. Because again, we're working on this as literacy skills. But the great thing is it doesn't have to be an either or thing. We can adapt it as our learners need it.
The hope is definitely that with all of the different options that we're providing through Edit View here, that you will be able to find a combination of supports that work for your individual learners. Awesome. All right, Beth, I think that was that step. What's next?
And just a couple of things, while we're still on this thing, just a couple of things that this really helps us address from a literacy perspective. Identifying where one word ends and another begins. That's in that cutting up part. Recognizing that there's space between words, ending a sentence in punctuation, like knowing that it's not going to speak for them until they get that punctuation in there is really great. And making a mistake as a learning opportunity. I love this acronym that somebody told me the other day, FAIL, first attempt in learning. Right? So we want to give our learners opportunities to fail so that they can learn from that mistakes that they're making, right? So just some really cool things. So the next thing that we are going to do, and again, now maybe it's a Wednesday and we've done this, and now I'm on to Thursday. And the next thing that we're going to do is called Be the Sentence. Now, traditionally in a classroom, you would take the parts of a sentence and you wouldn't do every single sentence because again, we're talking about, and for this, let me back up just a second. For this piece where they cut up the sentence and combined it, each student, each learner is doing one sentence. They're not doing every sentence. So again, that is something that could be done in a 15, 20-minute time period, not doing every learner doing every sentence. That would take a much longer time. So the same thing with the be a sentence, we might pick one or two of those sentences that they're going to be, meaning that each student is going to hold a word of that sentence and maybe the period for punctuation. And they're going to come up and physically line up and become the sentence. And the rest of the class that might not be, let's say you've got 10 kids in the class, but you've only got, 5 or 6 words in your sentence. The rest of the class is going to say, well, are they in the right order? Did we get them? And they're going to help rearrange them. And again, this is why I call it making learning life size. We get them up and moving and feeling like they're really a part of it. Now, in virtual learning, a lot of us had to come up with creative ways that this was going to work, because it might not, how your Zoom screens, you don't have any way of like rearranging people. And so there's a really cool way that we can actually do this digitally with Clicker. And it's by adding, now I said before, we don't want to add pictures, but the pictures that we do want to add with this one, or we're going to add a student's photograph. And in this case, we'll use generic people pictures, but you'd want to use your own students' photographs in this, so that each student gets assigned a word, and then we get that opportunity to put that back together. So like if we search for girl, try that one more time. I know there's a lot of girls in there.
There is. I had a space in between. Yeah. I was like,
you get our pictures. Now, again, if you were using your own, you can navigate to your own photos, right? You don't have to use these ready-made ones.
Yeah. So I'm using stock photos here through the CrickPix library. I'm just searching boy, and you're going to see these pop up. If you wanted to use images of your own students, as you should if you're completing predictable chart writing, when you come into your picture options, you would just save those images to the desktop, and then you would be able to access pictures of the kiddos there. Finish this off. Still have my space in.
Yeah, and I have to say, I got this great idea from the folks, Gretchen Hanser and her crew at I Hope. It's a private school in New York. And when they were doing their virtual learning, and they do a lot of predictable chart writing, they put the kids' pictures with those words so that they would be able to still be the sentence, right? And so we could talk about, is it in the right order, or do we need to move, do we need to move Patricia to a different spot, right? And that we can then, use our cut and paste abilities to rearrange some things. So just a different way that we can do it. You could certainly do it both ways, right? You could certainly do it with the people lined up, but also this way. And this is also such a great option if you do have that mix of hybrid learners, which so many teachers are doing right now, where they have students in front of them, and then they have a couple of kids for a variety of reasons that are joining them in their classroom in Zoom. This way, those students are not left out. And they're able to do that. And there's nothing that our students love more than actually seeing themselves as a part of an activity like this. So that's step 5, is be the sentence. And again, you're not doing all of the sentences. That might take a really long time. You're going to choose to do a couple of the sentences based on the amount of time that you have. If your kids are all into it and you got, a half an hour, you might get through all the sentences. But we're talking about small chunks of manageable time throughout your week.
Excellent. All right, Beth. So I believe that was step 4. The goal here is to finish with a book, to produce a collaborative piece of writing. And students are to leave this potentially week-long activity with a book that they've produced together.
Yep, exactly. So the step 5 is to publish a book. We want learners to see themselves as writers who have a product and who are writing for an authentic audience. And that authentic audience in this case is their classroom. They are going to produce a book that is a part of their classroom library. Now, you could make that broader, right? Depending on the resources that you have, It could be a book that goes into the school library. It could be a book that gets to get sent home to family members, right? Depending on the resources and the tools that you're using. But do you want to go ahead and show how in Clicker that students can write, can work together to write a book?
I would love to, Beth. If you know me, you know I love Clicker books. So we'll start with the options that we have available to us. So when I come into Clicker Set and New, these options will look familiar. When I select the Books tab, you guys will see we have a bunch of great templates for you to get started with. So I'm going to go into this option here. I want to first start by talking about the different options that we have in books. As we know, students access information in different ways, and we are trying to provide different ways for students to access that information. So I'm going to start with what we call a read a book. And a read a book offers text on a page. It might offer speech support, maybe the option for a student to speak what is on that page using our voice note feature. I am going to make it pretty. Make it pretty for us here, add some color, because we have the option to, why not, right? So with the read a book, I'm on my first page. I want to add an image, and working with the class to build this would be a great time to say, okay, guys, let's find our picture. What do we see in the fall? And again, keeping this a collaborative exercise. And then my sentence stem is going to be the title of my book. And I'm just going to put that in the middle there. Now, with Clicker, you have the option to continue on with the same layout. So when I select new page, I could go with my blank or the same design. And I've already put the work in here, so why not use it? So with the read a book, we're going to put this text on the page. Let's see what I have here. Of course, we're going to be using the text that the students populated together. So we'll start with, in the fall, I see colorful leaves. Again, we're going to go into our pictures and we're going to ask the kiddos, all right, what leaves do we see? Let's see. Do you like this picture? Do you like this picture? They're going to select and have that image on their page. We could, of course, continue on with the same idea here and populating to make this book that they have worked together on. So this is a read a book. We've populated it. Now the idea, of course, is for the kiddo to be able to read it. When we play it or go into go mode, we can now either just read the text on the page or utilize our speak text icon.
In the fall, I see costumes.
And have that read. Now, that option is the read a book. We also have what we refer to as a make a book. So I'm going to do the same thing here, follow the same procedure. I'm going to add my speak text. I'm going to add my voice note option, and then I'm going to apply some color here and make it beautiful for our readers. And I'm going to create my same page, my same title page, and we're going to have the same kind of interaction. What kind of pictures do we want to see today, guys? Not Niagara Falls. We want to see fall. And I'm going to take my sentence stem and pop this in here. But how we proceed is a little bit different. So with the make a book option, you have the opportunity as the facilitator to apply picture banks and word banks to these pages to not only provide the student with support, but to help transition from this collaborative exercise to more independent writing. So I come in following that same procedure. I don't want the blank because I've already put the work into my beautiful layout here. And I'm going to go ahead and add some of those supports here. So for my makeup book, I'm going to make sure nothing is selected on the page. And then I have these, my 3 lines here. This allows for me to apply different supports to the pages. So I'm going to begin with my picture box. And this is going to allow me to add a picture bank to this page. Come in my Crick Picks library, and I'm going to find some fall themed images. I'm inserting those. And these are going to be the pictures that come up in my word bank now, or excuse me, my picture bank. Now to transition to the word bank into text boxes. Here we have the opportunity to provide either a basic vocabulary word bank. We could also apply something that is more like a sentence set tied to this page. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a word bank with our sentence stem to give the student that additional support. I, of course, want to include my punctuation. We could make it, again, a pretty color. And then I want to show my word bank immediately. We make sure we have this checked off. I click close and it still looks bare. But when I come in, I see my grid icon and I can apply this picture. And then when I double click into my text box, it will automatically open that word bank.
And one of the things that I think is so important about this is that while we're giving them word banks, we always are giving them the opportunity to use the keyboard and type any word or any, right? So that's always there for them, right? So if they want to try to spell pumpkins, you know, whatever it is that they come up with, they don't have to use that word bank, but it's an option for them. And so it's really powerful because we're giving all sorts of different scaffolds of support, but we're never taking away the opportunity for them to write with all the letters of the alphabet. And I just want to stress that we are always giving learners the opportunity to type with all the letters of the alphabet.
Absolutely. And Beth, like we mentioned in our prep here, you can, of course, access the physical keyboard. We have our on-screen keyboard here, which is equipped with inward, next word, phonetic word prediction. So like you said, I love that acronym you used, giving students the chance to fail. It's always a learning opportunity. Okay, excellent here. So we have mentioned, Beth, a couple of times here that predictable chart writing is not to be completed in a single day. How do we make the time for it? And more importantly, why is it important to complete this full activity?
Right. So it is really taking students in bite-sized chunks, right? I would say, you know, the first day where you're writing that's going to be probably like one of your longest days. And maybe the last day where you're publishing your book together are going to be the 2 longest chunks of it, but also 2 really, really meaningful chunks. The problem is that if we always only go to day 1 and day 5 and we cut out the middle, we're really missing opportunities to get into much more in-depth opportunities for like word study and working on concepts of print and really building their familiarity with those words and that sentence stem and that concept. Now, that's not to say that every single writing opportunity that you do is a predictable chart writing. It's not. You should be writing more than just this, right? But that doing this on a weekly basis with one writing piece can be really powerful, and that hopefully you would see it translate into meaningfully into other writing activities also, right? That if we've been focusing on that I see, in the fall I see, 5 days a week, right? For 5 days in a week, that they might then translate some of that into some completely independent writing or completely independent communication that they're doing, or they're going to notice it in another book that they are reading, that they're going to make those connections based on that. So, it gives that in-depth opportunities. You don't have to bite it all at one time. Give yourself a half an hour on Monday, give yourself a half an hour on Friday, give yourself 15 minutes on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and do it. Use maybe the parts of this as, maybe you're going to do parts of it as small group writing activities. Maybe you're going to work individually with students on that, cutting it up and reconstructing that sentence. That might take a lot more one-on-one support with an individual student. And so maybe you're going to do that, maybe your para is going to do that as you're rotating and working with kids in small groups. It doesn't all have to be completely like that. You wouldn't necessarily have to do it all as a whole group. You're going to be the sentence all as a whole group, right? That's going to work best as a whole group. But the kids are going to, those opportunities for them to really get physically involved in something are going to pay off with their attention span. With that. Now, I know one of the things that we wanted to make sure that I wanted to make sure also is that depending on what you choose to write about, it might go perfectly into your science curriculum, right? So if we tweak this a little bit and we were talking about, we were talking about the change in seasons as part of the science curriculum, or weather, or whatever it is, it could all be a part of that. It doesn't have to be completely on its own. Maybe it's going to be a part of the social studies curriculum, so you can blend it into that other time, and it's going to reinforce ideas that are happening. And so it is, you're going to want to get to some of those different things. It's going to build on that background knowledge that they're gaining from different units of study in different curriculum content areas. It also lends itself to, don't stop at predictable chart writing. You want to make sure that you're giving kids that opportunity to write independently, just as Tony was sort of showing here with this. And it can become part of the I do, we do, you do learning cycle, right? We're modeling, then we all do it together. And then, now I'm going to set you up and you want to write your own fall book, right? Go ahead, go for it, right? We're going to give you all of these tools so that you can write your own fall book. We'll have our class book, but maybe you're going to write your own fall book. I also wanted to talk about how this activity is accessible and adaptable for all learners, including those with complex bodies. And there's some really powerful tools that Tony hasn't touched on yet in Clicker that support learners who need alternative access.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm going to just go into our accessibility settings for a second, guys. We've talked a couple times about how, maybe some of the learners you're working with might not be able to physically cut up the sentence, but we want to make sure that they can access this activity the same way that their peers can. So in Clicker, we have our options ribbon and a whole menu designated to access. We have super keys, which is an alternate access keyboard. Just to show you this really quickly, this is going to cluster the keyboard into manageable bite-sized pieces here. And then once you select that cluster, it's going to enlarge the contents by 4 times. This is great for anyone with motor control difficulty or advanced scan users or advanced switch users that are looking to type a little quicker. And then we also have our access methods here. So we have our eye gaze and our switch settings. Eye gaze will work on a device, on a Tobii. It will also work with a bar. And we have our options here for you to program according to your students' needs. And then we are also 1 and 2 switch available with auditory scanning and the ability here to support those kiddos with complex bodies, of course. Beth, we have gone through this and focused a bit on emergent writers, but we do want to talk about all of our learners and all of the kiddos that we work with. How could we introduce this activity for maybe older learners or just reluctant writers?
Yeah, I think now the idea of that sentence, and it really what it kind of walks into is that idea of that sentence starter, that sentence stem. And this doesn't have to be restricted to, and it can still be this collaborative writing activity too, right? It doesn't have to be restricted to our emergent learners, our emergent writers, our emergent communicators. We could be setting up really high level expectations. And so maybe for this fall brainstorming that we're initially doing, it might be the idea, all right, I need you guys to all brainstorm, but you need to give me, and maybe I'm working in an inclusive classroom, right? Where I'm going to have one learner who is going to be using their augmentative communication system and tell me, they're going to just give me the word leaves, and that's perfect, right? But I might be setting the expectation for the other learners in this classroom to be giving me they need to describe something about fall, and they need to use at least, one adjective, or they need to use an adjective, a noun phrase, or they need to use a verb phrase, or they need to use alliteration. So maybe it's going to be something like pulsing orange pumpkins. I'm like blanking on what I might do there, right? But the idea is it doesn't have to be simplistic writing, right? So this is something that I can do. I could do this with students in an AP English lit class. Now, it's not going to be fall is. It's going to be a sentence starter like a peaceful world means, and they're going to have to come up with some really fabulous, succinct, beautiful statement, right? So, that would be my sentence starter, is a peaceful world is, and we're going to get amazing contributions. But sometimes that type of a sentence stem and a collaborative writing experience is just what some of our reluctant writers need in order to sort of prime the pump for their writing, and give an idea for how they can produce more. And so using this doesn't have to just be for these emergent writers. This is something that you can really do across grade levels and across learners. But the beauty of it is that if you're structuring this type of a writing activity with an inclusive classroom, then those learners who are multilingual learners and are working on their English skills, those learners who have limited communication skills, or who are emergent communicators, can still participate as meaningfully, and it can be in the exact same activity. There's nothing worse than you've got one writing activity for the on grade level kids, and then a completely different activity for those kids that are included in your classroom. Because you know what? That's not an inclusive learning setting. But when we have one activity that can support and honor the contributions of all learners, we can have that. The other thing about that is, with those word banks that Tony has, we could put some really high level words. Like if they need to be using some high level adjectives or high level adverbs, we can pad word banks with those high level words for them to be looking at to help spur that writing. We could have content topic-based word banks that support those learners so that they are not coming up with, they don't have to remember, right, all of that high-level content vocabulary that they might be working on. So there's lots of different ways that we can use a tool like Clicker to scaffold this kind of a writing activity. And again, I know Clicker is sponsoring this. There's lots of ways, you can have low tech, we can have low tech word banks too. It's not about the technology. It's just that the technology often allows us to do this in a more meaningful way, right? With more supports and more strategies, that text to speech, so that they can hear it back and say, if they're working on alliteration, it's awfully nice to have text to speech to listen to that back and say, oh, is that actually alliteration, right? So some really, really wonderful ways that this does not have to simply be for our emergent writers, but it can be a great support for our maybe reluctant writers, right? So they've got to have that adjective, that noun, and that verb in there.
Wow. Well, we have learned quite a lot today, huh, Beth? This has been a great session. I certainly have, working with you on this. I've really enjoyed prepping for this. We've taken almost an hour at this point. We have identified the 5 steps of predictable chart writing, how we could actually make this happen, supporting all learners through this strategy. We want to open it up for questions at this point. We'll leave a couple of minutes for questions, and then I'll finish up with a little close. If you guys have any questions at all, please throw those in the Q&A while we have Beth here with us. I am the resident clicker expert. Beth is the resident predictable chart writing expert. So if you have these specific questions on chart writing, those into the Q&A now. And while you guys are getting those questions into the chat, I'm going to bring up our website for you guys. So I am on our website here, cricksoft.com, and I'm going to come into Clicker. I'm not going to go into the depths of Clicker with you at this point, but I do want to highlight our Be Inspired section. A lot of times our collaborators might really love our support, but those that are in charge of approving the purchases for these supports want to know that it actually works. So we have some great evidence that proves Clicker's efficacy. And so we have that with the Angus Council here. We also have a number of anecdotal options for success stories where we have actual schools and districts using Clicker and using strategies like predictable chart writing with Clicker. So I always like to recommend those. Quickly into our pricing options, we offer access on Windows Mac computers, iPads, and Chromebooks under single licenses here. You'll see our One School licenses up on the screen. With our One School site license, you could give every kiddo, every teacher, every support professional Clicker in that building for 3 years. You can also provide them with at-home access, which, as we know, can be pretty important with the status of the world being pretty unknown. We are going to be following up with you guys and trying to connect about how you guys are supporting both your emergent and reluctant writers and how we might be able to help with that. If you guys absolutely cannot wait to connect with us, you can, excuse me here. I'm going to just open up my start screen for you guys one more time. You guys can.
Kai has a great question.
Oh, great.
So she's asking, can you do just a word bank to build one sentence? For example, if I wanted students to write the sentence "ICEA" with a word bank for all words and options that they can see, can I design it so they just create one sentence?
Yeah, absolutely. So to do that, we would come into new. Let's see if I understand this. If I want to write a sentence ICA with a word bank for all words.
Does she want like a word bank option with, like, if they've got the sentence ICEA, but then have a word bank that would come up with like lots, like I see pumpkins, leaves, like lots of different options that you might.
Yeah, so you could do that in a sentence set or a word bank.
And she's saying for all the words in the sentence. Yeah.
So let's see.
Yeah, so the sentence set would give you like that starter sentence, and then you could have a word bank that would be the fill-ins as well, right?
Right, and I'm going to say pumpkins. costumes. We're going to keep with our same option here, and we'll do friends. So when I click OK, let's pop this back at the front. Something like this tie. And we would take out A, obviously,
Yeah, I was
to
gonna
make
say.
that make sense. I was like, is that what you were looking for, Ty? And we could also follow up after. That's fantastic. Awesome. Oh, that's great. And we'll follow up with you, Ty. Like I said, I'm going to try to get the closed captioning on the recording for you. All right, guys, just back here. If you absolutely cannot wait to get in touch with us about Clicker projectable chart writing, you could contact me here. Otherwise, we're going to be following up next week. I want to stop my share. Beth, thank you again so much for being here. It was great to collaborate with you, and I can't wait to work with you again in the future.
My pleasure. Thanks everybody for joining me. I saw some familiar names on there. So I'm really honored that you chose to spend an hour of your very, very valuable time with us this afternoon. So thanks, guys.
Have a great day, guys.